Amber Belkin was born on December 6, 1981, in San Antonio, Texas. She was an only child, which meant her parents gave her all the love and attention possible. From an early age, Amber had a strong compassion for animals. She was constantly bringing home strays, not just cats and dogs, but turtles, frogs, pretty much anything she could come across. And her parents actually allowed her to keep them. Eventually, she decided she wanted to become a veterinarian. After finishing high school, her plan was to attend college. But first, she thought she would save up some money, so she got a job at a video game store. Amber quickly showed herself to be dependable and hardworking, and before long, she was promoted to store manager. She held that role for about 3 years, and in 2007, when she was 25, she finally enrolled in veterinary courses at the local college. On January 29th, Amber was supposed to open the store for her shift, but for some reason, she never showed up. As the manager, she was normally the first one there, but that morning no one had heard from her. When the head office realized the store was still closed, they tried calling Amber, but she didn't answer. They even attempted calling the store's landline, but there was no response. So, they contacted a nearby location and asked one of the employees to stop by and check things out. An employee named Giovanni agreed to go over and see what was happening. When he arrived, the store was completely dark. The doors were locked, the lights were off, and it appeared like no one was inside. He walked around the building, looked through the windows, but didn't see anything unusual and left. Afterward, he informed management about what he had seen. They continued trying to get in touch with Amber, but there was still no reply. Hours went by without any sign of her, and around noon, they phoned the other store again and asked Giovanni to return for another check. Giovanni went back to the store, but this time something was different. The lights were still off and the doors were locked, but when he looked through the window, he saw someone inside. It was another coworker named Brandon. Brandon let him in, and right away Giovanni noticed the place was a wreck. Game boxes and other items were scattered across the floor. The register was open, and there was cash tossed around the counter. It looked like the store had been robbed, but oddly, Brandon was acting as though he didn't even notice the disorder. Giovanni went to the manager's office to check the safe, where the cash from the previous night was usually kept, but as soon as he opened the door, he froze. Lying there on the floor was a body, with a plastic bag pulled tightly over the head. Giovanni immediately called the police, and officers quickly arrived at the scene. It didn't take long for investigators to identify the victim as Amber. After looking around the store, they reached what seemed like the obvious conclusion. She had been killed during a robbery. The cash register was wide open, and the office safe had been completely emptied. Amber's car was still sitting in the parking lot just outside. The doors were unlocked, and her cell phone was left on the seat. That raised even more questions. Why would she leave her car unlocked with all her belongings inside? Another detail that didn't make sense was how the killer had actually left the building. Both doors had been locked when Giovanni first showed up that morning. With help from other employees, detectives discovered the suspect had taken more than just the cash. They had also stolen about 50 video game discs, an Xbox, and a few PlayStations, totaling around $6,000. While investigators were piecing things together, the medical examiner determined that Amber had died from asphyxiation. It appeared the killer used a plastic bag and held it over her head until she suffocated. Experts believe the struggle lasted several minutes, and through it all, Amber fought with everything she had but couldn't break free. They also found that her hands had been bound with duct tape at some point, but the tape was likely removed after her death. Detectives questioned Amber's coworkers and learned that she normally arrived at the store around 9 a.m., an hour before opening. Her routine was to collect the cash from the safe and take it to the bank before preparing the store for the day. Based on this information, Amber had arrived right on schedule that morning, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. Investigators believe the killer attacked her almost immediately, before she had the chance to grab the money. Soon, detectives received another important lead. The manager of a different store in the same chain said he had spoken to Amber on the phone that morning. They talked just a few minutes after she arrived at work, but the call ended abruptly. Amber suddenly said she had to go and hung up. The more police learned, the more it appeared this was bigger than just a random robbery. For one thing, the level of violence used didn't make much sense. Amber had apparently opened both the register and the safe. So, the killer didn't need to harm her in order to get the money. And if the goal was to silence her to avoid being identified, that explanation didn't fit either. In most cases like this, robbers use a gun or a knife. Strangulation, on the other hand, often indicates something personal. On top of that, detectives believe the killer may have entered through the back door, which raised another concern. That door opened into an alley lined with identical doors leading to other businesses. So, unless someone was familiar with the building, there was no easy way to know which door led where. Putting all this together, police began to suspect the killer may have had a personal motive, and possibly even worked at the store. The robbery, they now thought, might have been staged to cover up what was actually a targeted murder. Still, detectives didn't have a single piece of physical evidence to work with. Unlike every other location in the chain, this particular store didn't have surveillance cameras. And when crime scene techs examined the area, they didn't find any useful fingerprints or DNA on the bag or on Amber's body. But by the time police had pieced all this together, they already had a suspect, Brandon. As you may recall, he was the one Giovanni saw inside the store during his second visit. Brandon was standing in the dark, with the door still locked, acting as if the mess and the open register didn't exist. He also told police he hadn't entered the manager's office and never saw Amber's body. According to Brandon, he showed up for his shift just minutes before Giovanni arrived. When he saw the lights off and the store still locked, he assumed he must have gotten the schedule wrong. Maybe it was his day to open. So, he let himself in and discovered the place was a mess. But instead of being alarmed, he just assumed the night crew had left it like that and started worrying he would be blamed. Brandon swore he had nothing to do with Amber's death, claimed he never saw her body, and insisted he had no idea anything was wrong. But detectives weren't ready to simply take his word. He knew the building inside and out, knew there were no cameras, and on top of that, investigators found something else, a possible motive. Amber's family and co-workers told police she had complained about Brandon several times. He was her assistant, and according to her, he frequently slacked off and didn't take his job seriously. Things got so bad that she eventually filed an official complaint with management, and even asked that he be fired. But here's the crucial detail. Amber was planning to submit that complaint the very morning she was killed. So yes, Brandon had both motive and opportunity. But still, police didn't have a shred of evidence connecting him to the crime. They obtained a warrant to search his home, his car, and even his phone, and to their surprise, they found nothing. And that was unusual because the killer had taken nearly 50 game discs and 4 consoles. That merchandise had to be somewhere. But there was no trace of it, not in Brandon's car, not in his apartment. Even more surprising were his phone records. Data from his cell service provider showed Brandon was nowhere near the store until around 2 p.m., while Amber had been killed around 9 a.m. On top of that, he said he had an alibi. He claimed he spent the morning helping his fiancée and her parents, and when police checked, they all confirmed his story. Even so, investigators still weren't ready to rule Brandon out. For the next few days, they re-verified his alibi and tried to figure out if there was any way he could have carried this out. Meanwhile, Amber's funeral took place, and to everyone's shock, Brandon showed up. By then, her entire family knew he was the main suspect, so seeing him there felt like a slap in the face. But eventually, detectives confirmed his alibi was airtight. There was simply no way he could have been at the store that morning. So, despite the red flags and odd behavior, they had no choice but to eliminate him as a suspect and start looking elsewhere. They also considered Amber's boyfriend, a man named Fred. Just minutes before her death, she had texted him, "Love you." But like Brandon, Fred also had a solid alibi. Once again, police were back to square one. Later, investigators held a press conference with Amber's parents, asking the public to come forward with any information about the case. A large reward of $100,000 was offered, most of it funded by the store where Amber worked. In the following weeks, tips began to come in, but one by one, they all led nowhere. The case gradually went cold, and as months passed with no answers, detectives began to wonder if justice would ever come. That continued for 7 months, until the case suddenly took an unexpected turn. Police received a call from a man who wished to remain anonymous. He claimed to have information about Amber's murder, but at first, he was vague and hesitant. Eventually, however, he agreed to meet with detectives and share what he knew. According to this witness, the day before Amber was killed, a friend of his had suggested they pull off an easy robbery. He refused the offer, but the next day, when he heard the news about Amber's death, he immediately knew who was responsible, because his friend worked at the same chain. But that friend wasn't Brandon. It was Giovanni. The witness said he met Giovanni the day after the murder, and during their conversation, Giovanni openly admitted to killing Amber. The man claimed he was stunned by the confession, but at the time, he was too afraid to go to the police because he believed Giovanni might come after him next. What made his statement even more significant was that the witness knew both Giovanni and Amber. They had all worked at the same store at one point. So, Giovanni would have known there were no security cameras, and Amber wouldn't have thought twice about letting him in that morning. Soon after, police brought Giovanni in for questioning, but he denied everything. He insisted he had nothing to do with Amber's murder, and no matter how hard detectives pressed, he refused to break. In the end, they had to release him. With no physical evidence linking him to the crime, investigators questioned whether the witness's testimony alone would be enough for trial. But the district attorney wasn't convinced. He told them that without solid proof, there was little chance of convincing a jury. As a last effort, they decided to collect a DNA sample from Giovanni, hoping the pressure might rattle him. Even though they didn't have any biological evidence from the scene, maybe the idea of giving up his DNA would shake him. They got a warrant, went to his house, and Giovanni handed over the sample, but he stuck to his story and kept claiming innocence. Then, the next day, something else happened. Detectives learned Giovanni had left town with his wife and children. They moved to Laredo, right on the border with Mexico. To investigators, that was a major red flag. But the problem was, without hard evidence, their hands were tied. They couldn't arrest him, and now they feared he might cross into Mexico, where finding him would be far more difficult. Over the following months, police kept searching for new leads, but nothing came up. A year and a half passed, and it began to seem like Giovanni might never be held accountable. But then, out of nowhere, detectives received a call that changed everything. It was June 2008, 18 months after Amber's murder, and on the line was a woman named Veronica. What immediately caught their attention was who she was, Giovanni's wife. She told detectives that at first she never believed her husband had anything to do with Amber's death, but that changed the day police showed up to collect his DNA. As soon as the officers left, Giovanni turned to her and said they needed to pack up and get ready to move. When she asked why, he said the cops suspected him of murder. Veronica then asked him, "Did you kill someone?" And he looked her straight in the eyes and said, "Yes." Veronica instantly knew he was talking about Amber, but she was too terrified to argue or refuse. According to her, Giovanni had always been aggressive and controlling. He monitored her every move and refused to take no for an answer when it came to intimacy. If she resisted, he would tie her up with duct tape and force himself on her. He didn't care that their children were asleep in the same room. They all lived together in a one-bedroom apartment. She was convinced that if she ever went to the police, he would kill her. So, she kept quiet, moved with him, and tried to survive. But one day, she found the courage to ask him directly if he had killed Amber, and Giovanni admitted it. He also told her it happened during a robbery. Veronica begged him to turn himself in, but he refused. As a result, she told him she wanted a divorce and planned to take the children. In response, Giovanni said they should talk calmly over coffee. But instead of taking her to a cafe, he drove her to a remote area, locked the car doors, and pulled out a gun. She begged him not to kill her, but Giovanni wouldn't listen. He sexually assaulted her at gunpoint, and then suddenly did something she never expected. He handed her the gun and told her to shoot him. But Veronica refused. She managed to convince him that if he died and she went to prison for his murder, their children would lose both parents. Eventually, he calmed down and drove her back home. The next day, Giovanni took her and the kids to her mother's house, then left. As soon as he was gone, Veronica contacted the police. With her statement, the district attorney finally authorized an arrest. But there was one big problem. Giovanni's exact location was unknown, and detectives believed he was already in Mexico. They contacted the U.S. Marshals, who placed him on their 15 most wanted list and began coordinating with Mexican authorities to track him down. The process dragged on for about 6 weeks, until Mexican authorities finally located Giovanni at a relative's home. He was just across the U.S. border, only a few miles away. In a cruel twist of irony, when they arrested him, he was playing one of the very games stolen from the store the day Amber was killed. Under the extradition agreement between the U.S. and Mexico, bringing Giovanni back to Texas came with one condition. Prosecutors had to remove the death penalty as an option. They didn't have much choice, so they agreed. Later, they decided to offer Giovanni a plea deal, since without the death penalty, the district attorney didn't see much sense in dragging out the trial for years. As part of the plea, Giovanni was required to plead guilty in exchange for a life sentence, with the possibility of parole after 30 years. He accepted and finally gave his version of what happened that morning. According to him, he never intended to kill Amber, he just wanted to steal some money because he had recently lost his job. At first, he claimed she did everything he told her, but at some point, she tried to call for help. And that's when he killed her. But detectives didn't believe that explanation for a moment. For one thing, Giovanni hadn't lost his job. He was still employed at another store at the time of the murder. And second, the claim that he didn't plan to kill her didn't make sense either. Amber knew exactly who he was. Even if he had gotten away with the robbery, she could have easily told police who to look for. He also claimed he had felt guilty the whole time and had even thought about turning himself in, but said he kept putting others' needs before his own, whatever that was supposed to mean. As part of the plea deal, Giovanni only had to provide a partial confession, so some details about what actually happened that day remain unknown. In the end, he was sentenced to prison. The earliest he will be eligible for parole is in 2038. After the sentencing, Amber's parents made it clear they plan to fight with everything they have to ensure he never goes free. And finally, I want to mention Brandon, the man police initially suspected of Amber's murder. For weeks, detectives treated him like a killer, and everyone around him, his family, his friends, knew he was under suspicion. Investigators even tried to pressure his fiancée into turning him in. They asked her, "How can you sleep with a murderer?" and warned her she might be his next victim. But despite all of this, police never officially informed Brandon that he was no longer a suspect. For a long time, he lived with the fear that he could go to prison for something he didn't do. And the people around him had no idea he had been cleared. In the end, however, Brandon managed to rebuild his life. He got married, started a family, and in 2018, he even saved a young girl's life. At that time, he was working as a truck driver, and as he passed a drainage canal, he saw a 13-year-old girl being swept away by the current. A heavy storm had caused the canal to overflow. She couldn't escape on her own, so Brandon ran over to help. With the assistance of others, they brought over a ladder, and the girl climbed out. She spent a few days in the hospital, but she survived, all thanks to Brandon. If you found this case intriguing, make sure to like and subscribe. We upload new crime case videos every night. Stay tuned, and brace yourself for what's coming next.